We have been discussing the spike triggered average method to estimate receptive fields of neurons. We showed that simply by doing the spike triggered average of the stimulus, we can come up with a kernel which is the impulse response of a linear time invariant system, which can depict the overall pathway from the stimulus to the response transformation, albeit with further elements like static nonlinearity, then driving a point process to generate the spikes and so on. But ultimately, it's the main idea is that in order to go from the stimulus to response, the main part or the filtering done by the pathway or the neuron can be obtained through the spike triggered average. And these kind of methods have various extensions, as we have discussed a little bit. It can be extended to multiple dimensions and so on. However, there is one point that deserves your attention, and that is that in the whole derivation of the spike triggered average as a model for the neuron, we have assumed a white noise Gaussian stimulus, that is there is zero mean and the variance is sigma square, and the main thing is that the autocorrelation function is a delta function with no dependence across time. However, that is not generally true in the sense that we will be using many different kind of stimuli in estimating the receptive fields of neurons using the spike triggered average, and so we need a more general or rather an alternative to estimate those receptive fields, again using the spike triggered average, but with different kinds of stimuli. So that's one aspect that we need to cover. And another point that requires your attention is that so far we have been treating all this analytically, and we may in order to implement all this, we may have to go into discrete time and discrete representation of the stimulus space and so on. So we need to develop the same thing for discrete time based analysis. So in order to do that, let us consider the model. Let us say we are trying to estimate the rate response of a neuron at the time point t, or this is basically the center of a time bin, let's say, and that is defined by basically some kind of weightage of the stimulus preceding that particular time. So we will have this weight vector here, and this is the stimulus. So let us say that we are recording from a neuron. This is time and this is the rate response. So let us say this is 0 time, and this is the probability of spike or rate, or in terms of number of spikes per second occurring over time. I have drawn it in a continuous manner, but imagine this to be discrete. And parallelly, just like in the spike triggered average case, we have a stimulus. In this case, not necessarily a Gaussian white noise, but can be a stimulus that whose autocorrelation function is not a delta function. So let this RT, so this is our S as a function of time, this is R as a function of time, this is our time axis. This RT, let us say, is the rate in this time bin. This is our time t, and this is the rate value, that is this particular rate. This is our RT at particular time t. So the response in this particular time is dependent on from causality is dependent on some past history of the stimulus is what we will assume. So, at this time t and the preceding stimulus. So, since we have discretized the time, let us say this is S at the time point t, the stimulus preceding that time point t is represented by the vector st, okay, which contains the elements of the stimulus over time preceding that time point t. So, let us say this st is simply a vector that is S0, S1 or ST0, ST1 and so on up to ST some particular memory length capital M time bins. So, this is capital M minus 1 time bins. We can make this 1, make this 2, that is some insignificant factor. So, let us say this is the first bin, and going backwards this is the second bin, and this is the mth bin. And the corresponding values of the stimulus from the time point t backwards are in this vector st. And we are saying that the rate produced at this time point t, let us say we are considering this time point t here, the rate produced at this time point t is dependent on this stimulus st by some linear weighting. So, as we have been treating this as a linear time invariant system, so some linear weighting in the sense that this w, or we can call it let us say h, let us say, so this h transpose, it is another vector times st, this is another vector. So, what is h is essentially how the how the stimuli are weighted in order to obtain the response. So, we have note that we have removed the nonlinearity in this case, because we know that we can treat that in a I mean, in order to actually implement it, and I mean, it's still the results would hold, and in the from our previous discussions. So, we are now talking about the system without the nonlinearity and simply writing the rate as a weighted sum of the stimulus preceding that particular time point. So, in other words, so let us say this is our going to be H1, H2 up to Hm. So, the first stimulus is weighted by H1, the second preceding stimulus time point is weighted by H2 and so on. So, we have this H transpose S as the estimate of the rate. So, what we now have is this R hat at time point t is simply the H transpose. So, this is fixed for the neuron, this H is fixed for the neuron, in the sense this is what we are trying to estimate, and S at time point t, this vector. So, overall this thing is a scalar. So, in order to find out H that best describes the rate based on the stimuli and this particular linear model, we will consider the mean squared error, that is our actual rate that we have measured, which is R. Let us say we have estimated rate as R hat, you subtract this out and the square of that and average this over all the time points that we are using, that is all the t. This is an average over all the time bins. So, now we can simply replace our R hat with our model, that is H transpose S. So, we will drop the suffix T and assume it implicitly, and the averaging is also over time, which we will assume implicitly. So, this can be written as our average of H transpose S minus R squared average, which is, now if we multiply this, let us say we have H transpose S minus R into H transpose, this is a scalar, so we can write either one before the other one, or the order does not matter, and this is being averaged over all the time points. So, this can be written as H transpose of S transpose H minus H transpose S times R transpose. R is a scalar at that point, so we can simply write R, then minus R H, I'm sorry, this is H transpose R H transpose R S transpose H plus R squared, the average of this whole thing. Okay. So, this boils down to the average of H transpose S transpose H minus the average of H transpose S R minus R S transpose H, average of that, plus average of R square. So, this is simply the variance, or rather the average of R squared, if we treat it as if we convert it into a zero mean rate without any loss of generality, this is the variance of that R. So, but this is already available to us and it's a constant. So, this is the mean squared error if we use a linear model like H transpose S in order to estimate R, and we need to minimize this obviously. So, we take we take the derivative with respect to H in order to obtain the H for which this is minimum. And before that, we would like to bring your attention to these terms SS transpose, SR, RS transpose. So, SR and RS transpose, they are essentially the same, because R is a scalar, and so it is simply an average of the different R's with the previous stimuli, and so it is essentially the cross correlation between S and R estimated from the data. And SS transpose is the auto covariance matrix of S, and S being S being 0, if we can make S 0 mean, then this is simply the autocorrelation matrix of S. So, by representing that, the average of S transpose, we write it as CSS, that is the autocorrelation matrix, and similarly the average of SR is simply CRS, or the cross correlation between the response rate R and the stimulus. And so, these two terms both provide the CRS term, and so we can write this as H transpose CSSH minus CRS times H, or rather twice that, plus the average of R square. So now if we take the derivative of this mean squared error with respect to h, what we obtain here is simply 2 CSSH. So this is, if we consider this as E, then what we are doing is dEdH, that comes out to be CSSH minus 2 CRSH. And for this we equate this to be 0 in order for this to be the minimum, the mean square error to be the minimum. So that implies that our H is given by CSS inverse CRS. Now remember, this is exactly the same of what we had with the spike triggered average, barring the fact that the CSS inverse is an identity matrix for a stimulus that is white Gaussian noise, identity matrix, and scaled by the variance of the white Gaussian noise, because the autocorrelation matrix of the white Gaussian noise would be a diagonal matrix, which each diagonal element has the sigma square of that particular Gaussian. So what we are getting here is that this is the CSS inverse is providing a way to get rid of the correlations in the stimulus and allowing us to use any kind of stimulus per se to obtain the linear kernel estimate for the neuron. So it must be noted that using the CSS inverse is a little tricky, because due to because we have finite amount of data, we will always have finite amount of data, and even though we may be using a sample of, say, white Gaussian noise for our experiment, the CSS inverse might have very small elements that are non-zero, which actually should be 0 had we had an infinite amount of infinitely long stimuli. So in that case, if we use the CSS inverse, we blow up those errors, those non-zero values which should have been 0, those small values, and actually amplify the error quite a bit by taking the CSS inverse and get very ridiculous results. So we have to be careful in using this CSS inverse when we are applying this to correct for the correlations within the stimulus. We have to be absolutely sure about the strength of the correlations in order to apply this. So we have introduced the idea of doing this whole thing in discrete time, and also using the stimulus as in discrete time and values within those time bins, and we will use this setup only to now ask the question that if I have given that I am observing the rate response of a stimulus, or in response to a stimulus, given some new rate responses, can I reconstruct the stimulus? So far what we have been looking at has been the forward problem, that is, we have the stimulus going into this box, and then the output is our ratelets after a number of steps. So now if the question is that, okay, we have a set of observations like this where we have stimulus and rate like we drew, but now can we, if given some new rates or new number of observations of responses, can we find out what the stimulus was, which is essentially the decoding problem or reconstruction problem. Decoding can be done in many ways, and reconstruction is one of the ways in order to get back the original stimulus, which is not necessarily what the brain will be doing with wherever this rate information is going into probably the next stage neuron, but this may be what we may be required to do in case of let's say brain computer interfaces, where we need to know what was the stimulus given a set of responses from a population of neurons, and then decide the stimulus, and then based on that make a decision about what is to be done with the machine that has to be driven by the brain signals. So, in those kind of problems, these methodologies would be useful, albeit with more sophisticated methods. Here we will stick to the first step, which is a linear method for reconstructing the stimulus. Exactly as we did previously, we set up the same problem where now we have a set of rates just like the last time, and we have a stimulus in again in discrete time, all of them. So, this is our rate as a function of time, and this is our stimulus as a function of time. This time is obviously, as I said, discrete, and that is what we will be treating here. So, we set up the same problem in the same way. So, let us consider that this is the time bin t. Let us say this value here, this value here in that particular bin is the stimulus, and this is the rate. Now, a little difference in the problem here is that we observe the rate at a particular time t. It is not possible to estimate the stimulus at that particular time point. Because we have a causal system, there is a finite amount of gap based on which the responses are created based on stimuli. Remember, earlier we were using a vector of length m bins of stimulus to obtain the rate at time point t. So, this whole stimulus, this whole period of stimulus was being used to determine this rate. And now, from this rate, we obviously cannot determine the entire stimulus. So, for the stimulus at this particular time point to be determined, let us say now we are representing the stimulus in green here. In order to calculate or estimate the stimulus, we need the rates in future, because now the problem is the other way around. So, having observed the rate and stimulus relationship, let us say this is not online but offline, that is, we have a corresponding pair of stimulus and responses. Then, in order to estimate the reconstruction filter that we will use to a new set of observed rates to find out what the stimulus was. That problem is such that we will look into the future set of rates, and from that we will be estimating a stimulus in the past, in the beginning. Okay. So, that is essentially taking care of the causality. I mean, there are a number of ways of setting this up, but this is probably the simplest way, that we have a future set of rates, and we now want to get a kernel that will allow us to use these rates to calculate the stimulus. So, we will assume that we will go forward, let us say in this case capital M bins from 1, and likewise we essentially set up the same problem where we are saying that the estimate of the stimulus at the time bin t is given by some h. This is now a kernel that will be operating on the rate responses to estimate the stimulus, h transpose r at a particular t plus m, that particular vector. So, what we mean by r t plus m is a vector that contains the rates at time point 1 right after t up to time point t plus m after rm, which is at time point t plus m, okay, r1 to rm, and this is suffixed by t, or we can introduce the t here itself and in fact write it out simply as r t plus 1, r t plus 2 up to r t plus m. So now the problem is exactly the same that we were solving earlier, except now we have to use one particular constraint, and that is we require the stimulus to be zero mean for using of the autocorrelation function. So we need to correct for that, and that here we will be providing as basically H transpose times the R bar at over the entire stimulus. So essentially what we have is our S hat T is H transpose R. We are dropping the suffix and minus R bar, and so by subtracting out the mean rate, we are ensuring that the estimated stimulus is also zero mean, and so this we can call a delta or a d or something, and then proceed in the same way as we did for the forward problem. So H transpose D. So we have the exact same problem now, and the ensuing solution is also going to be the same. Now we will have the autocorrelation function CRR inverse times CRS, and so S is here a scalar quantity for each of the elements, and this is going to provide us our H. If you go on, or I'm sorry, we need to do this dd and this is ds after having subtracted out the mean rate, we are getting d. So by this now we can now after we have obtained H, if we observe rate responses for a period m and more, after observing the first m points of rate, we can use the H in order to estimate the first element of the stimulus, and in a sliding manner go forward and calculate the rate. So here after we observe, let us say, the m bins of rate, we can now say what the first, or estimate the first point of the stimulus, then going one step forward we can estimate the next point of the stimulus and carry on with it in order to fully reconstruct the entire stimulus given a new set of rates. So with this we will stop our discussions on the linear models, and later on we will take up a little bit more of second order and beyond models, a small discussion, but we will now change gears in order to go on into information theory. As we have said that it is the way to go forward because of the problems of using nonlinear models, because of the huge amount of data needed, because of the huge expansion of the number of parameters that are required to define a nonlinear system in terms of polynomial function of the stimulus space. And as the stimulus space, the parameters in the stimulus space keep growing, a second order model itself, there are a square number of parameters that have to be estimated. So that's why we will now introduce you to information theory techniques or ideas from information theory, and then show one particular methodology that can be used in order to use the advantages of information theory and still be able to model these kind of nonlinear systems. Thank you.